Valve just told its own customers that upgrading a stick of RAM inside a brand new $1,049 gaming console requires taking the entire machine apart, removing the fan, and pulling the power supply, just to add memory that should have been a 5-minute job. And the strange part is that this isn't a design flaw Valve is trying to hide. It's a trade-off they're openly admitting to, on a device that is somehow one of the most repairable pieces of gaming hardware released this year. If you've ever opened up a PlayStation or an Xbox and found glue, hidden screws, and warranty stickers daring you to go further, what Valve has done here is going to sound almost backwards. So let's actually open this thing up and see what's really going on inside. Because the answer isn't as simple as good or bad. It's a genuine trade-off, and by the end of this, you'll understand exactly why Valve made the choice it did, and what it costs the people who bought this machine on day one. The device in question is the Steam Machine, Valve's second attempt at a living room gaming console, and this time it's real. It launched in the final days of June 2026, starting at $1,049 for a 512GB model, with a 2TB version running $1,349, and a bundle that includes the new Steam controller, pushing that up to $1,428. Compare that to the $499 PlayStation 5, and you can already sense there's a story behind that price tag. Inside the small black cube sits a custom AMD chip, pairing Zen 4 CPU cores with an RDNA 3 graphics setup, and Valve has said the whole package delivers something like 6 times the raw performance of the original Steam Deck. It runs SteamOS 3, it plays your existing Steam library, and it can just as easily double as a compact desktop PC when you plug in a keyboard and mouse. On paper, that's already a compelling pitch. It also explains part of why the price landed where it did. Valve has been fairly open that the delay between the original November 2025 announcement and the actual June 2026 launch came down to a brutal stretch for memory chip supply worldwide, one that pushed RAM and storage costs up across the entire electronics industry, not just for Valve. AMD's own CEO, Lisa Su, confirmed during a Q4 2025 earnings call that Valve was on track to start shipping, which tells you this wasn't a secretive, behind closed doors kind of delay. It was a supply chain problem playing out in public, in real time, in front of anyone paying attention to the semiconductor market. But the more interesting story isn't what the Steam Machine can do on your TV. It's what happens when you flip it over, take out the screws, and look at what Valve chose to put inside. Because here's where it gets genuinely unusual for a console. iFixit, the repair and teardown outlet that grades hardware on how easy it is to fix, tore the Steam Machine down piece by piece and landed on a repairability score of 9 out of 10. For context, that's a score you almost never see on gaming hardware. Most consoles are built the opposite way, with plastic shells that are heat staked or glued shut, proprietary screws designed to keep regular tools out, and components that are electronically paired to the motherboard, so that even a legitimate replacement part gets rejected by the system. Valve did none of that here. The Steam Machine uses one consistent screw type throughout the entire chassis. Every internal connector is labeled, so you actually know what you're unplugging. And Valve has committed to selling official replacement parts through iFixit itself. That's not a company begrudgingly tolerating repair. That's a company designing around it from day one. To understand how unusual that actually is, it helps to put a number next to the alternative. Independent repairability comparisons across the gaming console market have repeatedly pointed to the same pattern. Consoles built around sealed enclosures, adhesive rather than screws and key spots, and parts pairing systems where a legitimate replacement component can be flagged and rejected by internal software simply because it wasn't installed at the factory. That last part is worth pausing on because it's not a hypothetical. Parts pairing means the device itself checks whether a component's serial number matches what was originally registered to it, and if it doesn't, certain features can be disabled or the part refuses to function at all, even if it's a genuine brand new piece of hardware. It's the electronic equivalent of a car refusing to start because you replaced a headlight yourself instead of taking it to the dealership. Valve's approach, at least on paper, avoids that entirely. There's no pairing lockout mentioned anywhere in the teardown notes, no proprietary chip standing between you and a component you paid for. And this isn't Valve's first rodeo with this approach. Rewind to the very first Steam Machine prototype back in 2013, and iFixit's teardown of that beta unit found a case held on by a single Phillips screw, with the hard drive and graphics card both easy to pull and swap. The philosophy has clearly carried forward. When iFixit later tore down the Steam Deck handheld, the same pattern showed up again. Components labeled clearly enough that the reviewers themselves complimented how easy it was to identify what they were looking at. A frame that came apart without fighting through layers of glue, and Valve confirming ahead of launch that iFixit would be an authorized seller of official replacement parts. The one weak point in that particular teardown was the battery, which came out awkwardly because of its L-shaped design. A reminder that even a company committed to repairability doesn't get every single component right on the first attempt. Still, the through line across more than a decade of Valve hardware, from that 300-unit prototype cube in 2013 to the Steam Deck to this new living room console, is consistent. Open it up, label it, and let people fix it. But on this new 2026 model, Valve pushed that philosophy further than it had ever gone before, in a way that created a genuinely strange contradiction. And that's exactly where the story about your RAM comes back in. Here's the piece that caught almost everyone off guard. The base Steam machine ships with just one 16 gigabyte memory stick, running in what's called single channel mode. If you're not deep into PC hardware, think of single channel versus dual channel like a highway with one lane open instead of two. The car can still get where it's going, but traffic moves slower than it could. Valve's own engineers confirmed the reason for this wasn't a cost-cutting decision made lightly. It came down to a global shortage in DRAM supply that hit the entire industry hard heading into 2026, squeezing margins on nearly every device that needed memory chips, from laptops to game consoles. So if you want to add that second stick and unlock full dual-channel speed, you're looking at roughly $225 for the upgrade. And this is where the plot thickens, because getting that second stick installed isn't a simple open the hatch and click it in job. According to the same Valve engineers, the memory slot couldn't be placed anywhere more convenient because of something called DDR5 signal integrity. Picture it like trying to have a clear phone conversation over a really long, tangled cord. The signal degrades the farther and messier the path gets, and DDR5 memory is sensitive enough that its physical routing on the motherboard has to be nearly perfect to run reliably at its rated speed. That constraint is what forced Valve to bury the slot deep inside the machine, meaning a full teardown, including removing the cooling fan and disconnecting the power supply just to reach it. It's a genuinely strange contradiction. A company praised for repairability just made one of the most common upgrades imaginable into one of the hardest tasks in the whole device. Think about what that actually means for a regular owner. Adding RAM to a normal desktop PC usually takes less time than making a cup of coffee. Pop open a side panel, click a stick into a slot, close the panel back up. On the Steam machine, that same basic upgrade means unscrewing the entire outer shell, detaching the cooling fan so it's no longer blocking access, disconnecting the power supply so you can safely work near the board, and only then reaching the hidden memory slot. Every one of those extra steps is another chance to bump a cable loose, strip a screw, or void something you didn't mean to touch. And it raises a question worth sitting with for a second. Is a machine still meaningfully repairable if the repair itself demands near expert level patience just to perform the single, most common upgrade in all of PC hardware? That same tension shows up again when you look at the storage situation. The Steam machine's SSD is replaceable, and iFixit has already published a step-by-step guide walking through exactly how to do it. But read the guide closely and a few warnings stand out. Before you even touch a screw, you're told to remove the micro SD card from the front of the machine first, or risk damaging it during disassembly. The 4 screws holding the bottom panel are hidden inside the rubber feet themselves, which is a clever design choice, but not one you'd guess without instructions. And once you're inside, there's a genuine limitation. The standoff mounting points only support drives in 80mm or 30mm lengths, meaning if you were hoping to drop in some oddball-sized M2 drive you had lying around, you're out of luck. It's replaceable, yes, but replaceable within a fairly narrow set of rules Valve has quietly built into the hardware itself. There's also a practical reason that SSD access matters more here than on a typical console. Storage is one of the 2 configuration choices Valve locked in at the factory, the other being whether you get the bundled controller, and unlike RAM, buyers can't simply pay more later to bump from 512 gigabytes up to 2 terabytes through an official channel. If you want more room for your library down the line and didn't spring for the bigger drive at launch, the SSD swap is genuinely the only path forward, which makes the clarity of that iFixit guide far more than a nice bonus feature. It's the difference between being stuck with whatever storage tier you originally picked and having a real documented way out of that decision months or years later. That said, it's worth being upfront that not every part of the machine has been fully picked apart yet. Teardown coverage so far has focused heavily on the case, the memory, and the storage, simply because those are the components most owners actually want to touch. Some finer details, like exactly how repairable the cooling assembly or the custom AMD chip's mounting will prove to be over years of use, are still things independent repair outlets are continuing to document as more units get into more hands. That's a normal part of how teardown journalism works with any brand new device, and it's worth flagging honestly rather than pretending every question about long-term durability has already been answered in the first few weeks after launch. Now, why does any of this actually matter beyond the spec sheet? Because the timing here is not a coincidence. The European Union's Right to Repair Directive officially takes effect on July 31st, 2026, and it requires manufacturers to make replacement parts and repair documentation available while banning practices that artificially inflate the cost of getting something fixed. Valve's existing partnership with iFixit, the shared screw types, the labeled connectors, the published spare parts pipeline, all of it lines up remarkably well with what that directive demands. Whether that's Valve getting ahead of regulation on purpose or simply a philosophy the company already believed in before the law caught up, is genuinely something reasonable people can disagree on. What's not up for debate is the contrast it creates against the rest of the console industry, where sealed enclosures and parts pairing have been standard practice for years, specifically to keep independent repair shops and everyday owners out. It also puts pressure on a business model that's been quietly running in the background of gaming hardware for decades. Sell the box near cost, or even at a loss, then make the real money back through digital storefronts, subscriptions, and licensing fees. Over the years, the device stays in someone's living room. Under that model, a console that's hard to repair isn't necessarily a mistake. In a strange way, it can even work in the manufacturer's favor, nudging frustrated owners toward buying a brand new replacement unit instead of fixing the one they already have. Right to repair rules, like the one about to take effect in the EU, exist specifically to push back against that incentive, by making sure that fixing something you own stays a realistic, affordable option, rather than a deliberately painful one. But there's an honesty check worth adding here too, because it would be easy to oversell this as Valve solving repairability completely. As of the middle of July 2026, Valve's own official step-by-step disassembly guides for the RAM upgrade had not yet been published, meaning early adopters who wanted to attempt that specific upgrade were doing so without Valve's documented blessing, relying instead on community teardowns and outlets like iFixit filling the gap in the meantime. That's an important distinction. A 9 out of 10 repairability score describes the hardware design, the screws, the labeling, the modularity. It does not automatically mean every single upgrade path is beginner-friendly the day you unbox the machine. Some reports have also noted lingering questions about how consistent that repairability experience will be across every production batch, since components and slight manufacturing variations can shift between units over a product's lifespan. So the fairest way to frame it is this. Valve built a machine that is unusually open by design, but openness and ease are not always the same thing. And this device sits right at the point where those two ideas pull in different directions. Step back and look at the bigger picture, and the Steam machine starts to feel like a genuine test case for what repairable gaming hardware could look like going forward. For over a decade, the dominant console strategy has been to make devices cheaper to manufacture at scale, subsidize the hardware price to move units fast, and then recover that cost through years of software and subscription revenue. Sony and Microsoft have both leaned into that playbook. Valve, notably, has said outright it isn't selling the Steam machine at a loss, and that the $1,049 starting price reflects real 2026 component costs rather than a strategy of losing money up front to win customers long term. That's a fundamentally different business philosophy, and it's part of why the machine can afford to be built the way it is. When you're not desperately trying to shave every possible cent off the bill of materials to hit an artificially low price point, you have more room to choose a modular design, standard screws, and a public parts pipeline, because you're not fighting against your own manufacturing budget to do it. Whether that approach becomes the new normal in gaming hardware, or stays a Valve-specific experiment that the bigger console makers quietly ignore, is genuinely still an open question. Sony and Microsoft haven't announced anything close to matching this level of documented parts available repair support on their own current hardware. And there's no confirmed sign either company plans to shift its approach for the next generation of consoles. If anything, the more common industry response to rising component costs over the past couple of years has been to protect margins by keeping repair centralized in-house, not to open it up. That makes the Steam machine less of an obvious industry trend and more of a genuine outlier, one worth watching closely over the next year as more devices start launching under the EU's new repair rules, and manufacturers are forced to decide whether to match that standard worldwide or quietly split their designs by region. There's also a quieter, more personal reason this matters, beyond the policy debates and the spec sheets. A repairable device changes your actual relationship with the thing you paid for. It's the difference between a console that quietly turns into e-waste the moment one part fails, and a machine you can reasonably expect to still be running years from now, provided you're willing to pick up a screwdriver, or willing to pay a smaller repair bill instead of buying a full replacement outright. That's not a small distinction for anyone who's ever had a console die right outside its warranty window and been told the only real fix was buying an entirely new one. If you've been following the console hardware space and want to see how this plays out, this channel is where that story keeps getting covered as it develops. So consider subscribing if you'd like to stay ahead of it, and hit like if this breakdown was useful to you. At the end of the day, the Steam Machine's real innovation might not be the AMD silicon inside it, or the 6 times performance jump over the Steam Deck, or even the price tag people are still arguing about. It might simply be the decision to hand the owner a screwdriver instead of a warranty void sticker, and trust them enough to let them look inside their own machine, awkward RAM slot and all. Whether that trust holds up once millions of these things are sitting in living rooms instead of review labs is the part nobody, including Valve, actually knows yet.